Hello, and thank you for joining us for tonight's celebration of the 2020 Trillium Book Award for Poetry. This event continues our Words Across Canada event series, and we're pleased to have collaborated on tonight's conversation with VerseFest. If you've been enjoying our programming so far, please do us a favor and like this video, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and hit the notification bell so you never miss a Word on the Street live stream. I'm David Alexander, and I'm the Festival Director for the Word on the Street Toronto. The Word on the Street, or WOTS for short, is a festival of books, ideas, and imagination. But we're also more than a festival. WOTS is a community. We asked, and you told us what matters most about the WOTS experience: discovery, inspiration, connection. Our community is creative and resilient, and we're excited to bring you the Word on the Street in your homes. Before I begin, I'd like to acknowledge that the Word on the Street operates on land that is the territory of the Huron-Wendat and Petun First Nations, the Seneca, and the Mississaugas of the New Credit First Nation. This territory is the subject of the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement between the Haudenosaunee Confederacy and the Confederacy of the Anishinaabeg and allied nations to care for and share the resources around the Great Lakes in peace. Takaronto is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people with long histories on this land. We are privileged to live, work, and create in this territory and strive to act with awareness and solidarity. We encourage you to educate yourself about the land you occupy, wherever you're tuning in from. Before I ask my fellow moderator, Teresa, to join me for this stream, a few words about the next events in our Words Across Canada series happening right here on the Word on the Street YouTube channel. On Sunday, September 20th at 3 p.m. Eastern Time, we're back with a special double-header presentation called Truth Be Told, with mystery writers Kevin Major and D.K. Stone, and literary novelists Andrea Gunraj and Carol Rose Golden Eagle. We're partnering with friends at the Word on the Street Lethbridge for this one, and they have several events coming up this week and leading into the weekend that you can check out at thewordonthestreet.ca/Lethbridge. Next week, we'll be celebrating the 2020 Trillium Book Award for Fiction in partnership with the Kingston Writers Fest. That happens on Tuesday, September 22nd at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. We'll be joined by CBC's Ali Hassan in conversation with finalists Zalika Reed-Benta, Martha Bailey, and Seth, and the award winner, Tea Matangi. Wild Words North returns to our Words Across Canada schedule on Friday, September 25th at 8 p.m. Eastern Time for a conversation with best-selling memoirists Jessie Thistle and Helen Knott. You can find more details about these events on our website or Eventbrite. The links will show up in the banner below and live in our comments section. And now allow me to turn things over to my co-host, Teresa Yang.
Hi, everyone. My name's Teresa, and I'm going to be co-hosting this event with David. We're really excited to be moderating tonight's event where we celebrate the work of Roxanna Bennett, Doyali Islam, and Matthew Walsh, all of whom were finalists for the 2020 English Language Trillium Book Award for Poetry.
And to start things off tonight, we'll be presenting a pre-recorded reading by Roxanna Bennett, the winner of this year's Trillium Book Award for Poetry, for their work, Unmeaningable. The disabled poem-making entity known as Roxanna Bennett gratefully resides on Aboriginal land. As a settler, they thank the many generations of Indigenous people who have taken care of this land from beginningless time. In particular, they acknowledge the traditional territory of the Wendat, Anishinaabeg Nation, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, the Mississaugas of the Scugog, Hiawatha, and Alderville First Nations, and the Métis Nation. This territory was the subject of the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, and the treaties that were signed for this land are collectively referred to as the Williams Treaties of 1923. Roxanna is the author of the award-winning poetry collection Unmeaningable from Gordon Hill Press, Unseen Garden from Knife Fork Book, and The Uncertainty Principle from Tightrope Books. Before we start the video, I'll just let people know the volume might be a little bit low on this, so I'd encourage you to, after I stop talking, turn up your volume a little bit higher for Roxanna's reading, and then when it's over, just turn it back down so that it doesn't sound like we're shouting at you. So with that said, please enjoy.
Hi friends, Thank you for inviting me to read. This is actually the first time I've been able to attend the festival in any capacity because it's not really accessible for someone like me who doesn't do great with outside and crowds. But thank you for inviting me to read. I'm going to read 4 poems from Unmeaningable, and then you can enjoy the rest of the panel who are up way past my bedtime. Code White. No matter what we need, it's over. Reseal the old hole and return to normal. Let us not unpack, but cope. Measure recovery in billable hours. Business as usual. Night nurse put through paces of the 4 a.m. Code White. Not a crash cart, but a cop car. Strong arms a bent woman. Stinking of cigarettes and shame. Shackled in the quiet room. Shot up on CPAM. No, it's not what we need. Someone selling blowjobs in the bathroom. Someone selling smack in the back parking lot. Someone's telling the workers that story again. Numb until check-in. Not a cessation of symptoms or a sorting of side effects, but another screening of One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. Best wishes. Now alone, you make friends of other animals, share peanuts and seeds with black squirrels. Buckless chipmunks run over your swollen purple feet. Faces bulge, stretch to hold what they need to live. Infant robin flips off its caregivers. Brown hair shifts on the sidewalk. Kingly grackle shifts silver-throated, stretches its wings, head like an oil slick. Dive bombs the dead pond and misses. You miss people now and again, in theory, but only for the stories. Cardinals come when you call if you call with a palm full of sunflower seeds. But at least they don't tell you to get well soon. At least they come when you call. The lantern and the ornate eye. Hephaestus, I have left. The circus, the spectacle, the tower. I have left. The living. Gone in a metamorpheous surgificial. Salvation does not come from refusing to take part. But what if you don't have a choice? Hephaestus, hers is not an art that acts as spectacle in a choked voice. A voice that is able and disabled. But what if you watch cardinals at the window? The opposite of able is enabled. A voice that is broken, wails, and blows. Hephaestus, I am not dis, but enabled to languish in oblivion. Unsustainable blue does not occur in nature. A poet I was. Was I? Or just another cripple crying violet, not seen to flee the inaccessible, or need to see be seen comfortable. Blue rose, come for the table, be stable, a brown nose budging for a seat at the fable. Blue grieves meaning, dreads meeting you in your unclimbable tower. Who rose to the moment of need? Who named my body mine, other, and ugly? Yes, I do grieve what I miss, and yes, I am lonely. Left aside, I slide bullets into my body, beg for mother, father, family, and then, yes, this hyacinth is other and sick and more unsorry. Thank you for listening. Enjoy the rest of the festival.
Teresa, I think you're muted.
Okay, I'm going to start that over. I'm so sorry. So thank you so much, Roxanna. Our next poet is Doyali Islam, whose second poetry book, Heft, was a finalist for both the Trillium Book Award for Poetry and the Griffin Poetry Prize, and was also named as one of the 20 best Canadian poetry books of 2019 by CBC Books. Poems from Heft have been published in Kenyan Review Online, The Fiddlehead, and Best Canadian Poetry. Doyali has been a National Magazine Awards finalist for poetry and a Pushcart Prize nominee. CBC named her as one of 19 writers to watch in 2019. Doyali lives in Toronto, Canada.
Hi, David. Hi, Teresa.
Hey.
I'm just going to read 2 poems from Heft. Poem for your pocket. What my pockets have kept over seasons: coffee change, house keys, TDC tokens, emptiness and silence, and my ungloved, reticent hands. Poems, thoughts of Miklos Rednoti, he who hid in his pocket a thin notebook on his forced march toward death in some unallied forest, forced beyond reason to one mass grave, one mass silence. Still, one silence his overcoat pocket would not keep. 18 months passed before his wife unpacked that pocket of earth, rifled through corpses, clothing, found what remained. It was love. Love rifled through Miklos's silences. Love gave his damp last pages back to sunlight's keep. Oh yes, yes it was love announcing in him I will find my way to you. I will come back. The ant. I pointed to the creature on the floor, the one hauling a burden, a rice grain, the one who had come from a sunlit wood. Such a slight thing to fear its composure. My father's eyes followed my gesture through to its visible end, and his hand placed a cup over the fraught form. So it traced the perimeter of its plastic cage, wondering at the hard, unseeable edge, hurrying to make sense of its enclosure. His hand tore off a piece of envelope and slid the white scrap under the cup. Then the ant was a black mark on a page, struggling to interpret its situation, while we spoke over it, opening a door. So too, one day, will he be ushered out, back into brightness in which once he stood, a slight thing exiting a hooded world, a smallness held close by someone like me, the white scrap laid over in quietude. But before he passes that ringless gate, tunneling through a belt of mystery, which is to speak of the journey of ants, he'll have looked for a burden all his life, something to heft for nourishment, something to pain him and free him at once.
Thank you so much. Our next featured poet is Matthew Walsh. Walsh hails from the eastern shore of Nova Scotia and has twice traveled by bus across Canada. Their poems may be found at Malahat Review, ARC, Existare, Matrix, Carousel, and Geist. Walsh now lives in Toronto. In their Trillium finalist confessional debut collection, These Are Not the Potatoes of My Youth, Matthew Walsh meanders through their childhood in rural Nova Scotia, later roaming across the prairies and through the railway cafes of Alberta to the love letters and graffiti of Vancouver. In this nomadic journey, Walsh explores queer identity set against an ever-changing landscape of what we want and who we are, were, and came to be. Matthew, hi.
Hi, nice to see you guys. I'm also just going to read 2 poems from my book. This first one is called Cringer. Cringer. I based my entire masculinity on He-Man, Master of the Universe's pet green tiger, Cringer. He had such good character, and I wore a mask like him. I breathed in medicines for my lungs for bronchitis. My mother messed up my tiger hair, called me Cringer. Dad had sort of closed the door to me, for I was not athletic like he. Cringer was shy, but in his mask he became confident. Like a boy in my class, Graham. I was born with a weakness and addicted to cigarettes. I knew I liked boys more than most girls, which was a depravity. I loved running after them, though I was not built for chasing. I dragged my leg a bit through the drugstores, waiting for my prescription, which came in big brown bottles like liquor. Tasted like window cleaner. In the cartoon, Cringer was an embarrassment, though a prophecy said he was not what he seemed to be. My mother slipped the mask over my head, told me just to breathe in, while I dreamed of living in the woods with Graham, building at everything, the possible dangers, a blanket with a chair under it. After breathing in my medicines, I made salad from weeds in the driveway. Dandelion flowers, blue gravel where I imagined blueberry. I was young, hungry for more than salad, but had no language for it. I went to Graham's birthday, sank his chips with dimes in the bathtub, so excited that I closed my airway temporarily. I was not the most powerful man in the universe, and not entirely what I seem to be just now. And this next one is called Blue Potato. Once during a harvest, we found a blue potato, and that was when I started to believe in life on other planets. I had to be a seed from a plant no one knew, and now we were all doomed. This is what happens when you come from a line of potato husbands. All the uncles and men wore hats that hid the eyes. Potatoes, the uncle said, good yield. They were so basic. Dad told me blue potatoes were magic, and now I can blame him for my overactive imagination. And wow, were we ever rich in the potato department. What I loved were the potato flowers, which I kept fresh in a drinking glass by the sink, under the impression it would live forever this way in my captivity. There were times I had to grub potatoes from the garden for dinner, and I would sit on the grass thinking gardens were like swimming pools because my logic was sound. As a girl, my grandmother used potato leaves to tell fortunes to know what boy to marry, but when I asked what boy I would marry, she said no boy, a girl. I wanted to be dropped in a metal bowl with water, and when I asked why, she said the potato leaves, and I would just stare at this familiar large pile of dirt, wondering what life was under it. And when I lifted up the rocks, I would see all kinds of life. But the adults always had their eyes on the back of their heads, watching me, and I would leave to make potato deliveries or potato trades, potato salads, and dream of growing many eyes and owning my own aisles of produce on another planet, not this planet. Can you guys hear the dogs barking?
A little bit, but didn't
Okay.
take anything away.
Perfect.
Well, thank you both for reading some of my personal favorites from your collections. Before I ask my first question, I'll let people know that if you'd like to order any of the 3 books that are available, that are on the Trillium Poetry Shortlist for this year, you can head to the Another Story Bookshop website and definitely pick these up or place an online order. They are worth your time for sure. So I'm just going to ask a kind of a broad question. If you could both tell us a bit about the inspiration behind your respective collections, and also behind how you title your work.
You want to go first, or do you?
Canadians are so polite. You can go first,
Okay.
Matthew.
Sometimes I just start out with a title, or like one time a title, titles just pop into my head, or like I take like some of the visuals from the poem and I'll try to turn a title out of that. And in terms of the title of my poetry book, one morning I just woke up and I just thought, these are not the potatoes of my youth. I just woke up and I had that line in my head. But then it also reminded me of like Shakespeare, like this is not the winter of our discontents, because it had like the same meter. So I don't know if that inspired it or not, but that's where it came from. And that has always been the title that I was writing it under. Yeah.
So I wrote Heft from 2010 to the last few poems were written in 2018. So it was a long time. And it began as an inquiry into how I could be more grounded in my poetry. I really wanted my poetry to have more of a physical, grounded quality to it. And I just wanted to know if I could do that through my technique. And at the same time, I submitted a poem to CV2's 35th anniversary contest, and they wanted writers to write in with a poem that used the number 35 to honor their 35th year in the field. And so I wrote a poem called 35th Parallel. And the idea I had for that poem was to write in a split form, or what I called a parallel form. And I'll just show you what it looks like. So it looks like that. You can see that slim column of white space down the middle. Oh, and that was how the book began. And once I wrote that parallel poem, I started thinking, what if I did a series of these parallel poems, and each one would reference a latitude line or a parallel and take two places on that particular parallel, and I would try to draw out the stories in those places. And because I was viewing my poetry and the world through this split form, my mind just started thinking, what if I applied this split form to the sonnet? So that's how the spore shift happening after the 7th line, and then an additional volta or shift happening after the 13th line. And then out of the split sonnets came the double sonnets, where I thought, okay, what if I doubled the sonnet and did 14 lines and 14 lines? So formally, that's how the book came to be. But in terms of its like emotional core, I think the questions that I was really interested in asking myself were, what is tenderness? What is mercy? How can I be at home in a body that experiences chronic and recurrent illness? What can be made of a life? And what hope can we find in a world that is largely filled with peril? Especially, now that we're in COVID, but always before, the world is so full of suffering. And I was wondering what we can make of living in this world together.
Wow, those are really awesome answers. Thanks so much for sharing. So I'd like to just read a quote I understand Roxanna actually made with respect to their work, Unmeaningable. They wrote, "Welcome to the freak show where the monster on display is a culture that stigmatizes sickness and a system that shames the sufferer. Behold the wonder of the ages, a human mind and a human body dissected and displayed for your entertainment. Witness the ritual of surgical sacrifice, observe the indignity of institutionalization, be astounded by the indifference of ableism and ignorance. This uncanny collection of crippled sonnets features a thrilling display of cannibals, chimeras, and the crucial question, what meaning can be made of a life lived in pain and isolation?" So it's Roxanna's question that really, I think, resonates throughout Unmeaningable. And I think it's particularly relevant in terms of these times that we're in, especially with COVID, to talk about, because I think ableism has shown itself to be particularly problematic right now. We see it with how people are discussing accessibility, accommodation, how people are accused of overreacting for taking the virus too seriously, and even in how people are being encouraged to make the best of things by exercising, being productive, doing your best because you were supposed to have all of this free time now. But I think ableism has also been an existing problem that's kind of been insipid in literature, especially in the way that we use metaphors to describe things. that are negative, or when you say things like, oh, this person was very ill, when you describe illness in poetry, it can often be described in the pejorative. So for both of you, can you describe some of the instances that you first encountered or realized that what you were hearing was ableist language in the poetry that you were reading or perhaps even writing, and how that really affected you?
I'll go. So it's a really important question, and I think that I've always been quite sensitive to language, and as writers, we are. I think it's part of our nature that we're very sensitive to how language works on us physically. But I really started to pay more attention to language when I was in Dr. Rod McCalco's Introduction to Disability Studies class at University of Toronto. And Rod would make us do little exercises like, okay, just go out in the world, go about your regular day, and try to listen for instances of ableist language. And so I would start to notice this. I would notice it in children's book like Heidi, where blindness was portrayed a certain way. I would notice it on the subway when I would hear someone say, oh, that's really lame. Or this speech about standing up for a cause. Like, what if you're in a wheelchair and you're not standing up? What does that mean? So I started to think about it more in that way. And I think to answer in kind of like another way, which is more slant, which is often how my poetry works, is when I was writing Heft, I was interested in mastering my craft, which I think as writers, we all want to do. We want to master our craft. But what I realized while writing Heft was that if you have not mastered empathy, you are no literary master. Compassion, sensitivity, empathetic imagination can just be discarded. It's embedded right within your rigor. And I think that this kind of empathy and this sensitivity, when we write with that kind of sensitivity, that empathy makes its own resistance. So it makes a resistance in language, and it makes a resistance in the world and into the ways that we see ableism affect all forms, that we live through, whether it's language or another kind of form.
I actually had the same kind of assignment from one of my creative writing teachers, Priscilla Uppel, where she had us go around when we were like writing fiction or like writing poetry and just take a day and just like walk around the city and see how everyone was like experiencing the world, and to see how your view of the world can be different or the same as other people's. And I thought that was like a very helpful thing for just like being able to like look at the world through another lens and like really understand that we're all going through things differently. And and like what Doyali was saying about people being asked to like stand up for causes or like rising up, like all of that language is like very problematic. So yeah, I agree. That
great.
Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah. So Matthew, in an interview with Rob Taylor, he mentioned that your poems have a real Frank O'Hara vibe to them, especially your poem Flanurial. And Teresa and I both thought the same thing. But Rob asked you if O'Hara was an influence, and you said, I haven't actually read a lot of Frank O'Hara, but every time I scream or cry in the bathtub, I think about him. So, can you explain yourself?
Yeah, I can try to. So Frank O'Hara has this poem, and it ends. The poem ends with him saying something to his mother, but he's like standing in the shower crying. But I forget what the poem is, but that's where it came from. I really love that poem. I just can't remember what the title is. But it's like, mother, mother, I'm standing in the bathtub crying. And like, that's the end line. And I always just really loved that line because it's just so very real.
It is very relatable.
Yeah, and his stuff is so funny and quirky, and like so emotional and lovely that I don't mind being compared to him at all. But I do have to read more of his stuff.
Yeah, and I think there's a tenderness in his work and in yours as well that
yeah. Well, if you're standing in the bathtub crying, you know. Yeah.
There is a real wandering in his work that I see quite a bit in your poems.
And he does like meander too. Like he is like walking through the city and like seeing everything that's going on and then like trying to articulate it in a way that he is special to him.
Did you start out thinking that your collection would travel all the way across Canada, or did that happen kind of by accident?
I think a lot of the poems were inspired by me just taking the bus to different places and seeing like different parts of Canada and like what it's like there. And then like one time I fell asleep on the bus and I missed my stop, so I ended up in this like little Quebec town for like a whole day, but there was like this festival going on. So I wrote a poem about that. So like all of those experiences or those poems probably wouldn't have happened had I not like taken the bus across Canada twice. Mm-hmm. And it was just fun to see like all of Canada and like all the regions and like all the different areas and stuff.
Cool. Well, we're glad you did.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So Doyali, several of the poems in Heft discuss chronic pain and the understanding of what the weight of bearing such pain every day means. In your poem Flare, for instance, you write, "Flare, as in sudden outburst of anger toward one's own body, wretched body that I look at when I dare. This body that means I'm alive, I'm surviving, but which I am trying to survive." In interviews, you've talked about having an autoimmune disease and experiencing chronic recurrent pain as a consequence. So we're fascinated how in the double sonnets, you seem to write about the experiences through split perspectives that describe the multifaceted ways in which that pain is felt. If you can, could you talk a little bit more about the process that led you to write the poem Flare?
Mm-hmm. I wrote the poem Flare late into the manuscript, so it was a late edition, and I think at that point in the manuscript, I wanted a way to be more vulnerable and to insert my body more concretely into the text, and so Flare became one way of doing that. And when I was writing Flare, I had just gone to visit a writer friend who was in hospital. She had broken her pelvis, and I went to visit her. And what I noticed was that Orthodox medicine has very clear ways of dealing with certain kinds of illness or certain experiences in life. So, for example, if you fracture something, there's generally, I would say, like a standard course of healing. They understand the cause of that illness, the etiology of it, and they therefore know how to heal it, which medicines to give, how long you might take to recuperate. But what happens when you have someone like me who has an undiagnosed illness that is chronic or recurrent? So it is that kind of illness and that kind of body treated in the current system we have of Orthodox medicine. So I was really thinking about that when writing Flare. The other thing I wanted to say is I came across a meditation, and I actually came across it after the book was published, but I wanted to mention it in case anyone wants to look into it. But it's called Meditation for Pain Relief, and it's by Peter A. Levine and Maggie Phillips. And this was the first time I experienced a meditation that I related to. And Peter Levine talks about how when you are in this experience of chronic illness, you actually want to abandon your body or escape your body. And the way back into healing, any kind of trauma, is actually to come back into your body. So you have to figure out how to inhabit your body in a safe way. And this meditation really helped me to do that. So in Flare and in Heft, I was I was thinking about this question of how can I be at home in my body? And everything in Heft works in tension with each other. The elements are always playing off of each other. So flair as a more explicit way of me talking about chronic illness was in tension with the redacted bands of text that run through the book, and I'll just show you what they look like. So they run through like that, and these redacted bands, I think, are like a latitude line of my body. It's my way of inserting my body and weaving it right through the rest of the book, which has much to do with global conflict and family. So I wanted to weave myself in that way. And these redactions came from clinical studies. So I'd go on PubMed, and it really felt like a full-time job to be researching my chronic illness. And I went on PubMed and I just started blacking out the lines. And the illness that I thought I had, which my symptoms most closely resemble, is called hidradenitis suppurativa. And what I realized was that if you erase out certain portions of the word hidradenitis suppurativa, you're left with the word hidden. And so that became the word that ran through those bins of text. And it was my way of being vulnerable and speaking to chronic pain without being too vulnerable and feeling like afraid.
Wow, thank you for that. Really helpful. I just was doing a walk with a friend in pharmacy that had a really long conversation with me about mindfulness practice and how that's one of the most helpful ways to cope with pain. So it's really helpful just to hear that you actually have a meditation that you'd recommend. So thank you for that. So Matthew, you grew up in Nova Scotia, and I understand you went to Vancouver to complete your MFA at UBC.
Yeah.
And in a way, that literally kind of sounds like you went from one end of Canada, in a way, like one end of the world to another.
That's how I always see it too.
Yeah. So like for me, I grew up in the prairies during a time where I think diversity and acceptance weren't as celebrated as they currently are. And I wanted to, in a way, I think through moving to Eastern Canada, kind of redefine myself against a world that I thought didn't really understand me. So in your poems, I could really relate to this sense of traveling and trying to discover through you who you are really through your observations of others. So one of the, and you know, that process can be pretty painful because after I think you experience a sense of belonging through your travels, you kind of lose sense of home base, which even at one point in your life wasn't really home base to begin with. It was just simply what you knew. Mm-hmm. So one of my favorite poems in your collection is Catholic and Church, and it seems to kind of talk about this. I'm just going to read it, just one of my favorite parts, just because I think it's so great. I just want to share it with everyone. It would have made things easier if at an earlier age I could have said the word gender, but I grew up in a place where no one talked dirty or questioned. We would go through the clothes in suitcases, fight over the teacups of dead relatives, and donate to the church. And I never ever got anything back, but being held back in Sunday school one year. What? Because I wasn't a good enough human or something? And I can't eat any more of his body or those wafers. They taste like a body. I feel like a man's body makes me feel nothing when I have no choice. Church no longer means man and woman under God to me. No, it does not. It is a street in Toronto where you find out where you find out having the best time of your life that Mariah Carey is now considered retro, and you stand there in the middle of the dance floor, ghost of your former baby gay self in Blue Note jeans and your Blue Notes motion t-shirt with brown leaves and your neck covered in blueberry hickeys that you are middle-aged. So, I just love this, and I really want to know how you reconcile the influence that organized religion has had on your life with the exploration you've certainly expressed so beautifully in your work with regards to queer identity and how you ultimately were able to express yourself in poetry.
Ooh. Well, I felt like taking the bus and being alone for a few months really helped because I feel like you really get to know yourself, like who you are outside of like organizations. And things like that if you're just like focusing on your own mind and your own brain. And yeah, and like, well, Doyali was talking about meditation. So when I was on the bus, all I would do is just sort of like, not meditate really, but like just really think about like everything that like happened and what religion means to me, and I just guess was looking for like other places to find that kind of support and community that didn't really accept like didn't accept like gay marriage or gay people or queer people or trans people or anything. And those are all my friends. So I was like looking for another place to put my roots down, I guess.
Thank you. So both of you talk quite a bit about family in your poems. Doyali, you really did this really beautifully in poems like Aries the Ram, Okay, Virgo Sleep, and my favorite, Moving 1993. And Matthew, I saw this throughout many of your poems too, like I Think My Dad Liked Me, Mom Types, Individual Cats, Your Mother, Underground, and St. Clair Station. And I think one of the most painful poems in the collection, which was Life of Brian. And I don't know about you both, but I can recall so many instances growing up where I would like look at my parents and I would say, I am never speaking to you again. I'm so done. It's over. But here I am just years later, still constantly writing about them and finding inspiration from them. So I wanted to get your views on what you think it is about your families that makes you revisit them time and time again as subjects for your poetry.
Matthew, do you want to
yeah,
go?
okay, I'll go first. So yeah, I mean, like, it's really hard not to go back to, like, everyone always says, like, write what you know. And like, you just know those people so well, and you know all their like little eccentricities, and like they do teach you, for better or for worse, like their experiences in the world, and then you have to sort of interpret them for yourself and like either take it on or like kind of just like realize that you don't feel or think that same way, and just sort of like figure out what you want to do. Kind of just like realize that you. Oh, sorry, I heard my voice again. Yeah, and like family is obviously very tough, but there's also like lots of little beautiful moments as well that you can't forget either. And I think writing poetry is a way to kind of work through any issues or problems or regrets that you've had or things that you've experienced, and sort of like therapeutically work through them in your mind, and like writing them down and getting them out, and then like really polishing them up, and like hopefully like letting go of some of the negativity or pain that you experienced growing up.
Thank you.
Yeah, Matthew, I can really relate to what you're saying. And I was thinking along the same lines. And for me, it's really that poems help me to remember like the best aspects of my childhood, and they help me to honor the best qualities of my parents. So for example, in the poem The Ant, which you heard, it was my father's mercy towards a creature that's much smaller than him, and what that one action means, if it's amplified throughout our world, how would our world be if that's the way we treated each other? Or thinking about the way that my father was also very, very concerned with justice, and for example, the treatment of Palestinian people, or my mother and the way that she would make little rice balls for me and feed them to me one by one when I was sick at home. And writing the poems really helps me to remember these memories and articulate them in a way that feels good. And I think also too, which I think relates to what you're saying, Matthew, is that poems, writing it really helps me to understand that parents do their best. Like everyone in the world does their best, and to learn that we can take a trauma-informed approach and understand that maybe there were difficult things that we all went through, and maybe we don't always agree with our parents in some respects, but we can take a trauma-informed approach that is more compassionate. My partner and my in-laws are watching Ozark right now. We're catching up. So like we did season 1, and now we're into season 2. And my partner was saying to me the other day, why is it that we feel so much for Ruth? And why do we want her to do well, even though she has done some questionable things? I won't spoil it, but like, let's just say questionable things. Why do we want her to do well? And I think it's because the show does this brilliant job of taking a trauma-informed approach and showing that she has a certain relationship with her father, that she has a certain social status, and all of these factors come together to inform who she is. And she's still trying to do the best she can and navigate in that world she's in. And I think poems help me to just have more of that understanding.
Yeah. I remember this one thing about my dad on New Year's. He did this thing where he like opened the back door of the house, and then he ran to the front door of the house and pulled the door open to like let the good air in and let the bad air out. And he was just like so excited about that. And I totally get now why he did that. Like, it's just like all those like little details come back to you when you're like really thinking about poetry and like what you want to write.
Yeah.
And also Ozark is a really good show.
My dad did the same thing, Matthew. So that's so fun.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's just I think it's a New Year's tradition or something. I don't know.
But yeah, you're right. It's like, yeah, it's just it's weird to see your parents get like excited about something like that, right?
Yeah. It was actually nice to see him so excited.
Yeah.
Sometimes I find the older I get, there will be a moment where suddenly I'll remember something my parents did that I could never understand. And suddenly in that moment, years later, I'm like, oh, now I get it. You really have to live through the experience to understand why something that you didn't understand is so understandable.
Yeah.
Oh, I totally have had the same moments, Teresa. Like, yeah, like, oh, that's why my mom did that. Like, and then you're like, oh, okay. What does that mean about me? Like, how do I approach the world? Is it the same as her, or has my experience just like kind of intersected with hers in a way, and now I understand? Those moments are really interesting.
It's not so bad to become like your parents after all. Like, rebel again at some point.
No, I mean, I think again, everyone has like great qualities within them, and we should honor those.
Definitely.
So I'm going to ask about kind of what you're working on next. A lot of writers at times, particularly this one, talk about hitting a wall. So I'm just wondering, in terms of long-term, given the success of your respective collections, what does the next project look like for you? Do you imagine yourselves writing each book as completely separate entity, or will it be a continuation? What do you see tackling next with your writing?
Well, currently right now, I have a bunch of like poems stacked on top of my radiator in my bedroom that have been sitting there for quite some time. And then I have like 15 or so other poems that are like typed up on my computer, but they're not very good. So I am working towards something, and it will be different. It won't be like so family heavy. It's more about, I don't know. I don't know if I should say, I don't know. Well, I am working on something. It has art in it, and
Okay.
some things. Yeah.
When you're ready to reveal it, let us know.
Yeah,
we'll be
I totally will.
waiting.
We will actually be waiting.
It's hard to stay in the faith that writing requires. Like, it's hard to stay in touch with that faith. And I'm currently not writing anything, just zero, and I don't plan on writing anything again. And I don't want to have this like identity of myself as a writer, or I'm just one thing. So the question I ask myself daily now is just, how can I relieve suffering in the world, and what form do I want that work to take? Like, art making is one way to do it. Writing poetry is one way, but that's like a very it's hard to know what your yield is when you work in art making. And sometimes I just want like a more tangible, qualifiable, quantifiable knowledge of what I've done in the world. And maybe this sounds strange, but I just don't know what Heft did. I know how I felt when I was working on the poems, and I know the satisfaction it brought me. You just have no idea if they've actually made a difference. So I don't plan on writing anything more, and everything feels very amorphous and open right now, and I'm just like holding my arms open, like, universe, like, help me to figure this out. Like, I'm here. We none of us know how much time we have in the world, but I'm here. Like, let me just like do the best work I can. So that's kind of where I'm at. And I think, like, going back to why I titled Heft, one thing I realized after the book came out was that heft is like an expulsion of air. Like, if you say the word heft, like, notice what that does to your body. Heft, like, it's an outpouring. And so it was this real emptying out. And I think I just am in this space where, like, I still need to recover and find out what I'm going to do next.
Yeah, you feel heft right in your belly, and it comes right out. Like, it's very weighted, but then it's like light when you release it.
Yeah.
I can really relate to that.
Yeah, like heft, like it heft, like you just feel it, like the air coming out. And yeah, I don't know. So I don't know what I'm going to do next.
Well, I can see from the comments that, like, everybody loves your work, and
are there comments?
It certainly has had an impression. I don't know if you can see the comments.
Oh, I cannot. Hi, everyone.
So yeah, everyone is very happy with both of your readings.
So just to pick up on that note of not writing, but other things that we can do to make a difference, are there examples that you've been involved in the past few months since the book came out? Anything you'd like to tell people about that you think is worth getting involved in ourselves?
I think that we just always need to ask ourselves, like, what are we doing and why are we doing it? And if we have good answers for that, that feel like right within our heart, within our gut, then we're doing the work we should be doing at that moment. And I don't think there's ever like a right answer or a wrong answer. It's just getting in touch with your heart, your intuition, that like inner voice. But after the book came out, I just like slept a lot. And then in January, this past January, I went back to school for massage therapy, which is something that I always wanted to do. And I ended up having to drop out of the program because of my health issues. I was having more flares more intensely, and COVID-19 times. I think I would be pursuing something that's called biodynamic craniosacral therapy. And I would have been doing that training in the States and flying probably every month or two to the States. But obviously I'm not doing that. So right now I'm just doing like a Qigong practice at home to work with my own energy. And yeah, like just hanging out with my husband and my in-laws, and obviously watching a Ozark. And yeah, that's what I'm doing.
Nice.
Cool. Well, so the three collections are very different, but one of the things that I think ties your books together is the embodiedness of not just the speaker, but of each poem. Like there's definitely like a physical element happening. Matthew, in your book, you get turned into a pretzel, a cat, a cabbage. You swim through your grandfather's potato garden. And Doyali, in your poems, you seem to transcribe people onto the animals and landscapes around them. Just one of the many wonderful things about the split structure of the work. So I was wondering if you could each speak a little bit more about how you choose to embody the speaker in your poems.
For me, it just depends on like what the tone of the poem is going to be. Like if it's a serious poem, I probably wouldn't turn myself into a pretzel maybe, or it just depends on like how you want the poem to land, I guess. Because when I was swimming through the potato garden, that was like the best, most freeing moment I could ever experience when I was a kid. I just remember smelling the soil and like potatoes all like flying everywhere. But yeah, I mean, I liked cats because everyone always says they have like 9 lives. They always land on their feet. Cabbages, because of Cabbage Patch Kids. Like I always just like that idea of like, because my grandfather had this huge cabbage patch, and Cabbage Patch Kids when I was a kid were like very, very popular. So I really did believe they were children. When you're young, you just like believe all these like magical things. So yeah, I think it just depends on like how you want the poem to come across, how you want the poem to land, and the persona sort of plays into that, depending on like what you want the tone to be. If you want it to be like funny or comical, or like serious, or like hit a certain vein. All of those play into like how you want to put your persona together for that particular poem.
For me, embodiment is everything, and it really was a driving force and a central question when I was working on the poems that became Heft. As I spoke about earlier, I really was conscious of this question. How can I be more grounded in my work, and how can it be more physical? So I was thinking about that question when I wrote each poem. And I think like the work approaches embodiment in different ways. Like, as you mentioned, David, it works through animals like, or insects like the ant. And what I realized when I was thinking about your question, David, earlier today, was that a lot of the poems that deal with justice, like the poems that deal with occupation and Palestinian resistance and resilience, those poems, I feel like I often go slant and use a metaphor to like gesture towards that resilience. So for example, in Water for Canaries, these 2 Palestinian men returned to their home during a ceasefire, and their home is utterly destroyed. But yet there's this beautiful Associated Press photo of these 2 men feeding water to their birds, or giving water to their birds. And I just was thinking about that amazing, almost like cruel irony of, that they're able to give mercy, give life to their pets, even at a time when their lives have been completely upheaved. And I think in a way, like if you use animals or like the bird, for example, it helps to make that articulation clear without sounding like you're yelling or reading a speech, because there's speech making and there's poetry making, and I think that they're different. Like obviously speech making uses rhetoric and literary techniques that poetry uses, but I think they're separate, and poetry often operates with a more subtle hand. So turning to animals as metaphors can help us speak to our world, but in a way that's like more slant, more gentle, and more complex too.
Yeah, totally.
That's great. Thank you.
So this sums up our interview and the moderating piece for this evening. So thank you both again, Doyali and Matthew, for your attendance.
Thank you.
And we'd really like to just close the evening by having
Thank you.
If you don't mind, if you have time, starting with Matthew first.
Sure. I'll read the one with the cabbage in it. It's called Wheelbarrow and Cabbage. My grandfather used to lie about his profession. He told me he was a school teacher in the math field. In his garden, he took attendance, which I believe to be a habit from his school days. He looked at what was there, counted rows of pumpkins, the plot of cauliflower, which did look like brains, and cabbages so big he didn't even think he could move them based on his weight times the age he had become. All his sons, who could carry cabbages on their shoulders while grandfather counted the heads, moved on. One September, he had too many of them. If he did not harvest them under the harvest moon, they would turn into children from the moon. I did not want any more sisters or brothers, but I would stand up for them if it came to it on the brutal playgrounds. I would scream, "He ain't a cabbage, he's my brother." Who cares if someone thinks you are a lunatic if you are doing what is right? My grandfather would take a knife to cut them and cut them from the ground, lifted them hardly into his wheelbarrow, which fit 6 and me comfortably. I liked riding with my family. In the house, he scared me, pretending he didn't know which was a cabbage and which was me. I would try to convince him that he did not grow me. I was cabbage not. Maybe a boy, or because shyness, a tomato, half vegetable, half fruit. And maybe, do I read one more? I'll read one more. This one's called Amanda. She's a massage therapist. Amanda, she can turn you into a pretzel. Spend 2001 repeating the mantra, bony landmarks, and listen to Clips music. She once turned $5 into strawberries and a 2-liter Baxter ice cream. So supportive, I thought I could grow in her old spare room. Once we changed a man into a horse and into a man again. Once I dated a giant who broke our pull-out Japanese cedar futon from the internet and my bed and the internet, and we can laugh about it now. Amanda is an essential oil master. She told me that my aura was blue with red freckles and would ask me sometimes to let go of my body so she could turn me into a pretzel. I was scared to be a pretzel, but she was a great rearranger. I had parts of myself I did not know were part of myself. My little pea-shaped bone adjacent to the clavicle sounded beautiful and cracked beautifully. She thought my problem was I could not imagine my body as spaghetti through guided imagery. At restaurants, she could never decide, did she want the cedar plank roasted salmon or the Tai Long noodle soup? She found for me my great trotranter. I could not shut up about it. She located my wings of ilium and said now I could let go of my legs.
Thank you. I just want to read this comment as you were
No.
reading. Someone wrote, they had me at He-Man Monsters of the Universe, and by magic potatoes, I was looking up a book.
Who was that?
Tyler.
Okay, I don't know who that is. Hi. Thank you.
That was
Doyali.
awesome, Matthew.
Oh
my God.
I love your ant poem so much. I always think about it.
Oh, I love your work. I really think like it's really hard to put out a debut book that is so strong, and it's just amazing to me. Like, I had to write my second book to feel comfortable with my craft, and even still there's like elements that I don't appreciate and I would change, but I just think it's amazing. Like, keep going.
I think it's amazing that we got to meet and got to do so many cool things with our books. Like, we did the Bards on the Beach thing, we did that other thing with the magazine, and it was really great to meet you that way.
I know. It is so cool. Like, Teresa, you too. Like, I heard your name from Sylvia LeGray, like, years ago, and then finally got to meet you in Toronto, and it's just like amazing how our lives connect in different ways over time because of poetry.
I was proofreading your poem when I was maybe like 17 or 18, and I turned to Sylvia and I was like, oh my God, who is this person? And then I met you because I had tweaked you online, and you were standing outside I forget where it was, and I immediately knew who you were, and I knew who you was, but I knew. Oh yeah, and like all of the comments right now that I'm reading, they're just so supportive, and everyone's just like, Doyali, you're brilliant, you're at a crossroads. It's just everyone is pretty much 100% I think inspired. I wish you could see them.
Should I read one?
Some poems.
Should I read one or two? Okay.
2 is great. Yeah, do it.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, I'm gonna read a poem called Okay, and this is for all you OkCupid users or former OkCupid users, and for all of you astrology buffs. Okay, Jane and Methuen outside Golden Gecko Coffee. 2 nights before you, Gemini rising, decide we're long-term incompatible because our astrological charts don't align, and henceforth become known between Daniel and me as Astro Guy. We're on our first date, walking Bloor West Village for hours. Hours in, your 4-year-old daughter calls again, wanting to be sure you heard her say, I love you.
Oh.
No hesitation, you offer it back. Cradle softly your smartphone, softer still this phrase, which, offered once by my father, might have rendered useless so many years of therapy. You are bare and sweet with each other, bare and sweet like the maple-lined streets twined with light, being as it is 3 weeks before Christmas. And Christmas being the season to believe in something, anything, I choose belief in the power of the word vicarious. This moment managing to fill a gap that probably led to OKC in the first place. And because when has my dating life ever turned out, I decide for once to be prudent and selfish, to take this one thing, store it away for winter, here in this poem, this ledger of tender, because, well, trust a Libra with Jupiter in Capricorn to keep account, and because I need to be left with something.
Oh.
I love Matthew.
So good.
And I'm going to end with a poem called 2 Burials. And a lot of the poems in Heft are site-based, so the subtitle will have a place reference. So the reference for this poem is Millwood Park. 2 Burials. I once saw a she-goat give birth to twins. Well, in truth, I fled the delivery, but saw the blood and placenta marking the worn stall when I swept the chevrerie of its filth. Yes, it was spring when I saw one kid with ears of brown velvet die slow, in a straw-filled crate in front of a wood stove. I had gone to the French Pyrenees to learn what life was like, And when her small body no longer stirred, the farm kid's wails went up like smoke, an operatic pall. I was reminded then of another day, closer to home but just as foreign, when two girls dragged solemn feet through autumn, led by a man with a brown paper bag. Days before, it had held some grilled delight, but now betrayed something cold, a weight that might have been a clementine, the kind mothers pack their children for school. I think now of him among shadows and oak, he whose hands carried to the woods that sack, and bore the stiff, unassailable load until the earth claimed it back. Not once had he fed the creature, refilled the glass tube with water, or changed the pungent felts of her bed. Yet he stood in a clearing, with Sunday best and grave words, to mark a tiny passage and a grief still furred.
That was so beautiful.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. This has been a real delight, and I'm very grateful to each of you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. This is like the best hangout I've had in a long time.
Yeah, thank you. This has been really, really nourishing, and it's just amazing what we can do from home. And going back to what Roxanna said, I think it's really important because a lot of people couldn't make it out to readings in person. It just wasn't feasible. There were so many barriers to in-person events.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's great that we can gather like this.
Yeah.
For sure. And it's something our team's been talking about a lot. This year's a very different Word on the Street festival, but there's definitely parts of it that we kind of like better. So I think we'll look to continue doing some of our programming in this kind of a format moving forward.
That's a great idea.
It's just terrible it had to take a pandemic to realize how many things could actually be so much more accessible.
True.
Yeah.
Well, that is going to wrap it up for this evening's event. Thanks so much to Teresa, Doyali, and Matthew for the inspired conversation. Thanks to Roxanna. and thanks to Roxanna, of course, for their powerful reading from Unmeaningable. I also want to thank VerseFest and Ontario Creates for their support for this event, and of course, for the Trillium Book Awards. I also want to thank everybody for tuning in from home. If you'd like to order Heft by Doyali Islam, These Are Not the Potatoes of My Youth by Matthew Walsh, or Unmeaningable by Roxanna Bennett, you can head over to the Another Story bookstore website at the link in the banner below or in the comments section. And you can join us back here again on Tuesday for our celebration of the Trillium Fiction Award. Details about all of our upcoming events can be found at thewordonthestreet.ca. And of course, don't forget to register for WOTS 2020, our first ever virtual festival of storytelling, ideas, and imagination, streaming live right here on YouTube on September 26th and 27th. If you'd like to support The Word on the Street and events like this one, please visit thewordonthestreet.ca and click the donate button. Thanks again for joining us, and have a great evening.